and we will move on with our lecture tonight. So let me move a couple of screens around. And I don't know, 4 weeks. I'm not sure. HTTP probably 3 weeks from now. Maybe it's 4, actually. So single page applications. Okay, so tonight we're going to continue our talk about React and React components. So we're gonna continue working on a guided demo that I believe you guys are all working on Hogwarts demo during class last week. Not the project, but during the actual lecture time. Great. So we're going to take the Hogwarts React app, and we are going to keep working on it and build some class components with it. So share my screen. All right. If you can either watch along with me, you can work on yours that you built yourself, or you can also jump in to the code pen that we have here, which has all of our awesome CSS already built into it. So it can look the same. So let's go talk through what we've got all right now. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So we have built a component called app, right? For those of you that watched the videos last night, what type of component is this in React? And what type of component is everything we have right here right now? Yes, this is a functional component. So what is, let me see how I can phrase this. What is the difference between this function and any other JavaScript function? Okay, cool. So let me go through here. So the answer that I was really looking for is nothing, right? This is a JavaScript function, but there are a few small differences than a normal JavaScript function, what I would call. The first one, and I think the main one, is that we are returning JSX, right? So we're still returning something. If we ran this in, if we did something like this, let's just, for fun, let's go run this in a normal JavaScript compiler, or we're going to see unexpected token, right? Because this is not JavaScript. This is JSX. So it is being run through a build process that's turning this JSX into React and into usable JavaScript. But other than that, a functional component is, or a functional component is just a JavaScript function. There's nothing crazy going on with it. We're going to call it, we're going to use an uppercase letter by convention to say that this is a component, but really, I can call this anything I want, right? It doesn't have to be called app. I can call it anything I want, and it'll still work. Okay, well, it should. I don't know why it's not loading. Being weird. Console. What did console in there? App is unrecognized. Oh, okay. I see why that's happening. Anyone have a guess as to why that's happening and why we use an uppercase there? It's reading this as JSX, and it's saying, like, I don't know what an app element is. So that's why we use the uppercase. So that we don't get confused with uppercase button. If we wanted to create, a component called button, right? We do something like this, and we return button, right? This is a button. So the reason we use the uppercase here is to not get this component confused with this element. Little thing that caught me off guard right there. It's not just convention. It's because if something is lowercase, it's going to think that it is an element to be rendered as JSX. So beside the point. So we have a functional component. So inside of this functional component, we are now creating we're calling a subcomponent in here. So we're creating this tree system where app is a kind of the shell for our entire application, right? So this is our app right here. App. And then we're also putting a Hogwarts student component inside of here. Hogwarts student. There we go. I won't make you watch me try to write with my mouse. So now we have another component being rendered inside of here. Okay. Let's go look at Hogwarts students. How many, I'll ask a question. How many components can I render inside of this div right here? How many subcomponents can I do? Yeah, it's unlimited. We can do as many as we want. Remember that for now, for the time being, the sake of argument, everything needs to be wrapped in a single element, but you can have as many children as you want. Yeah, exactly. Well, you're right on it, right? How much space does Code Sandbox have? How much space does my computer and my browser have? That's going to dictate how many children or subcomponents I can have in here. But really, with enough CPU power, the answer is as many as we want, right? So we'll come in here. We're using some static data right now, this array with these Harry Potter individual student objects that have name, identity, image, age, best friend, etc. in it. And then we're going to render it using Hogwarts students, okay? So we have our div. Remember, we have a wrapping. Doesn't always have to be a div, okay? It can be any element we want it to be. You're going to see it as a div most of the time because divs are really easy to play with and transfer around. So you'll most of the time you'll see it as a div. As a side note, in the future we don't need to wrap anything, but that's still coming. So inside of here, we have an H1, right? So we have our H1 up here. We have another div wrapping class list, okay? So what are we doing in here? We're grabbing this array of students, and we are using the map method on it. So what are we going to do here? What does map do, first of all? Let me ask you that. What does map return? I'll say that. That's easier. Yeah, it creates a new array, always, okay? So map creates a new array. So after I do this, is students still all of this data? Yeah, it totally is, right? This is creating a new array, and React has a way and knows that when it sees an array of components to just render them, okay? And so that's why kind of in the new, which we're not going to mess with in this course, but you'll see something like this happen. But you have to have some special stuff going on with it, or you'll see empty divs. That might actually work. That'll work. But we're going to go with divs from now on. But anyways, when React sees an array of components, it knows just render those components to the screen. Okay, so what we're doing is we're going to map over the students, and each student, what is student here? What data type is student? Yeah, it's an object, right? So each of these whole objects, we are then creating a new instance of the student component. And what do we call this? When we pass data down to that component. That is a prop, okay? How many props can I create on one component? Once again, unlimited, but obviously there are always limits. Some sort of arbitrary limit that I don't know the answer to. But for the sake of argument, unlimited right now, right? We can create as many props as we want. I can say like name, it's going to be Dan, color, greatest color in the world, Dodger blue, right? You can create as many props as you want. Did it change anything on these components? And why did it not? Okay, we have a yes. Okay, let's say we have a no and a yes. So those that said yes, that's fine. You can say yes, right? On these components, on what we're seeing on the screen, I'll say it didn't change anything. Why didn't it change anything? Yeah, I'm not using these props, right? Let's go look in here. I don't see a props.name. I see props.student.name. I don't see a props.color in here, right? Because we're not using them. Is this component, is props.name and props.color in that props object? I see a lot of typing, so I'm going to wait. I see one yes. I see it's on the student object. Say another yes. So it is on this. If I console log props right now, let's do it. We are going to get what data type is props? Anyone? Props is always going to be an object. And we're going to have a student, and we should have a name and a color as well. So we have the student, which is an object with all of our student info on it. We have a name prop and a color, right? And the name and the color are the same on all four of them because we've just added them statically, right? As Dan and Dodger Blue. So the props are getting passed. We could use them if we wanted to, but we're not because we don't really, those are dumb and we don't need those right now. I only do this to show you that props we create the names of, okay? There are probably more than one, but there is one prop for sure that exists that we don't create, and we'll talk about that in a later lesson. But for the sake of argument right now, we create these props. We give it the name student. I would say, yeah, student is a good name to give that prop, right? And then we use that prop in our component. Yeah, it's the key, right? It's the key and the key value pair on that props object. So now that I took that other stuff away, let's go console, and then we'll see now that the only prop on here is student, and it's that object that we passed it, right? And this is different for each one. Why is this different for each one? Because we mapped over that array. Cool. So now that we have this concept of props down, we're going to introduce a new concept. But before we do that, a new data type or a new concept of storing data. Before we do that, we're going to create a class component, okay? So there are two types of components in React. There are functional components, which we have been creating for the last week, and there are class components. Anyone that has watched the videos know why we would create a class component over a functional component. Okay, great. I like this a lot. We have a lot of state answers. That's correct. We're going to be talking about state in just a moment. So we need to use a class component right now in order to use state. I like Robert's answer of to inherit. We are going to inherit a lot of stuff from the base React.component class, right? We are going to create a child component that inherits from the React.component class. So the major reason we use class components over functional components is state and something called lifecycle methods. And we're going to talk about lifecycle methods next week. But for now, we're going to just use it for state. Okay. I like to talk about when I teach React, at which point do I use a class component over a functional component? And unless I have stuff architected really well, I usually always start off with a functional component. And then when I find that I need to use state or I need to use a lifecycle method in a component, that's when I switch it to a class component. And you'll get really good at changing functional components into class components. And we're going to do that right now. So what's the major difference between a functional component and a class component as far as syntax goes? We need a constructor, we need a render, but I think Sean was the one that was on it. We need to replace function with class. It's a simple keyword change, right? So we are going to create a class called Hogwarts Students. Okay, remember this is just JavaScript. Okay, so let's just forget about render and all that stuff right now. We're going to create a class called Hogwarts Students. Okay, so this class needs to inherit from a parent class. So what keyword do I need to use after Hogwarts Students in order to inherit? We're going to extends. Remember, think back to, oh man, that must have been over a month ago, to your JavaScript class instructions. So we're going to create a class using the class keyword, going to name the class, and we're going to extend. And what we're going to extend here is React.component. So React has already created a class for us called component. Okay. So you'll see it written like this. You'll also see it written like, we can just grab that class like this and just say extends component. Either way, it works. But I'm going to use React.component so that we know that this class is created by React. So that's all we need for that. Every single class needs something. Remember, this is ES6 class syntax. We could have written this as an ES5 class, but right. So we need a constructor in our class. And what does the constructor do? Just as a little bit of refresher. What does constructor do? It will inherit, yep. That is one of the things it does, but what's its main purpose? Yeah, it initializes that class, right? When I say, if, just so you know, under the hood, when you do Hogwarts Students, what React is doing is this, right? Or it's going new. Right, so when I write it out, when I initialize that class and pass stuff into it, constructor is actually the thing being called. Okay, so the constructor initializes that original class. All right, so is our regular Hogwarts Students functional component, is that receiving props? It's not, right? It's not receiving props. We don't have any props in here. The student component is definitely receiving props, but the Hogwarts Students this main wrapper component is not receiving props. So if it were receiving props, we would put props in here as our constructor, but it's not, so we don't need to worry about that. So now that we have our constructor, when we are extending the functionality from a parent component or a parent class, I should say, in here, what keyword do we need to use in order to get all of that awesome, cool, extended, inherited stuff? Yep, we need to use super. So super, let me ask you this. Here's a good trivia question. What is super doing? When I say super and like that and call it, that's not just like, don't just memorize this, understand what it's doing. Yeah, Rain got it. I think, yeah, so no, Rain definitely got it, but I wanted to say, I think, anyone else get it? But yeah, so what it's doing is it's saying, call this class's constructor and put everything onto this class. So React.component is going to have stuff like lifecycle methods, something called set state. It's going to have this dot props. It's going to have a bunch more stuff. And so what it's doing is it's calling the parent's constructor, and now then it's saying like this equals the parent's constructor, that whole object, okay? So just so you know what it's actually doing. This gives us all of the superpowers from the predefined React.component already. Boom, exactly it. Let's see. Calling the parent, getting methods from the parent, inheriting the parent class properties, inheriting the attributes and methods of the parent class. Yes, Ronnie. So JavaScript is constantly evolving. And no, you don't need to use super or class anymore or constructor anymore. For the sake of this course, you're going to use constructor and super. It works fine. You can look into it on your own as a stretch problem, as a stretch goal. There's a ton of articles written about why you don't need to use this stuff anymore. And essentially, it's all come down to ES 8 and 9 and Next and crazy stuff that people are doing. But we're going to use it just so we get a grasp on what's actually happening. So I am requiring all of you to use constructor and super for this class. You can go in as a stretch goal. Steve, I don't think you'll ever see React in brackets like this. What you will see is component in brackets up here. And what this is doing is this is allowing us to grab just the component class from the React library and use it down here like this. Okay, so you will see it like this quite often. Wilfred, you are getting into the realm of hooks, and that's where React is headed. But for right now and for this class, we're going to use constructors and we're going to use class components. No, it's cool. It's totally cool, Ronnie, because you're going to start to see, if you go off and do your own research, you're going to start to see a lot of blog posts and things written that don't use constructor or super and have something like this. It'll look like this. You're like, what is even happening there? Like I said, for right now, we're just going to use this. Go off and look on it in your own. We learn it this way. It's like how you had to learn how to use ES5 classes before we learned ES6 classes. We want you to know what's actually happening. Cool. So now we need one more piece of data in order for this class component to work. All right. This is where our plain old JavaScript ends, right? And then we're going to start off with React now. So, yep, a few of you have gotten it. We are going to need to add a render method. And when we add an item like this, we are adding a method to this class. Wait, why is it giving me an error? No, that's fine. What is this doing? Where is this adding this to? Anyone know? Hark back over a month to your... No, it was a month and a half. It is adding this. No, I'm gonna wait for a moment. A lot of good guesses in here. Not quite. No, this method. Where's this specifically adding this method to? Boom, Edgar got it and Will got it. It's the prototype, right? So we're just adding a method to the prototype. We need a render method on this class. Does anyone know why we need a render method? We need a render method to render. Thank you, Dustin. When state is changed, it calls it. Yes, it does that too. Gets exported. Will got it first, but there's Jason got it. Rain got it, right? React, one of the things, and in fact, I think the only thing that React component requires us to have is a render method. It does not create a render method on its parent class. It's going to require us to create it, because when React, in all of its beautiful glory that's totally removed from us and in our knowledge, what it does behind the scenes is it creates a new version of this class, and then it instantly calls the render method on it. So it's going to do something like this. Let new HWG equal new Hogwarts students. It's going to pass some props into here, and then it's going to say new hg.render. This is what React is doing behind the scenes, okay? It's going to create a new version when we do something like this. That actually equals React doing this, okay? So it's going to create a new instance of that class, and then it's going to automatically call render. First things first. And we'll learn more about like when it calls render and why it calls render later on. But this is what it's doing. So we have to have a render method in here. Render is then going to return what we had before. And we will uncomment that. And now we should get all of our wonderful stuff. Robert, that's a great question. We do not get the render method from extending React Component. React Component, when it calls this class, when it creates this instant, it's going to expect there to be a render method there created by us. So it's the one thing that we have to create on this. That this part is not JavaScript, right? I mean, it is, but it's not like part of the normal building a class thing. This is us building a method that React is going to expect to have. Rain had a really good, Rain said it's part of the component contract. The component contract, it's going to expect there to be a render method on there, okay? So just know that and what's actually happening behind the scenes. All right. Let's do that. Make it prettier. Okay, cool. So we got 5 minutes. I'm going to throw in state right now. So I would say that 75% of the time, the reason you create a class component is to use state. And what state is a way for us to hold and manipulate data, as well as manipulate the UI that's displayed on the screen based on that data, okay? The entire reason React exists and the entire reason React is so popular is because of state. And so Everyone, React itself claims that React is simply a UI library. It only allows us to display some data based on, or display some DOM elements based on the data that it has. And it is going to react, pun intended, to the data when it changes. Okay, so that's the reason we really use React at all. And it's this thing called state. And state we create in the constructor. Okay, React is going to look for something called state in the constructor. If it doesn't have it, it'll build it itself. But we're allowed to set data on this component ourselves. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to say, let me explain this a little bit further for those that didn't get to the TK stuff. We're going to say this.state. So this is going to be referring to the instance of this class when it is built by the constructor. Just some more under the hood stuff. And this.state is always going to equal an object. Okay, it's always going to be an object. On this object, we can put whatever key value pairs we want. I can then put name, Dan, color, Roger Blue, etc. And now we have access to this state inside of our component here. Okay, we have access to this data. And you're going to be like, well, who cares? You can just hard code in Dan and Dodger Blue. Well, we'll see in a little bit that we can change this based on user interaction and clicks and mouse overs and things like that. This data can change, and when this data changes, React will automatically update our components for us, okay, which is what makes React so powerful. In this case, we're going to do something. Let's go state students. We're going to call the state students, and I'm going to set it to an empty array, just so you know that's actually happening, okay? Inside of our render, let's think back. If we had props in here, how would we use the data that's in the props? This is a tough one, actually. Let's come back to our functional one, because props is used a little bit differently in a class component. In our functional component, first of all, we need to use our curly brackets inside of our JSX to tell the JSX that we are using JavaScript inside of here. And then we find the item that we want. In this case, props is an object. It has a student key, and inside of that student key is an image key, right? So in our class components, we do the same thing. So we're going to say state students. And the big difference here, which a couple of you have pointed out, is in order to use state, we have to use the this keyword. I don't want to make this too confusing, but does anyone know why we use the this keyword in this? It's a class. Scope, yep. It's not actually referring to the parent, Jason, it's actually referring to the instance, right? So if we didn't use the this keyword, then it would be the same state for every single instance of this component. Since we are using the this, then now we can have 10 Hogwarts students components on here, and they would all have their own states. It's to make it dynamic, yep. So in this case, we're going to use state students, and we'll see that there's nothing on the screen. Why is there nothing on the screen right now? Because it's an empty array, right? I just did this so that we can clear the screen and I can show you. What I can do here is then set our initial state to that student's array, okay? So it's a little contrived, right? Because we're like, well, why, and we'll see why we do this, okay? So now we have our state students is set to this array. This is our initial state right here. After we get back from the break, we are going to talk a little bit more about events and changing our state. All right. So let's take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we'll delve more into state. I'm not going to throw like the cool music and electric ones on the first time. So we'll build up to that. All right, come on back, everyone, and we'll continue on our class components journey. Cool. So we now have our state set to students. Before we continue with the students thing, I want to show you what makes React really cool. And it's really just based on changing of our state, right? So in this case, I'm trying to think of a really good, quick, easy example. Let's do this. We're going to go with the old color route again, because color is easy. And so someone give me a color that's not Dodger blue. Any color, CSS color. Olive drab. All right, we're going to go with it. First one wins in this case. Olive drab. I hope it's real color. We'll find out in 1 second. All right, never mind what I'm going to do here. We'll learn about this later. We can set CSS styles on. There we go. Color. Olive drab is a real color. So look, I'm going to change to something. Salmon, I think, is going to be a better color for us. All right. So we have a color up here, right? So we've used our state to set the color of this header, essentially is what we've done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a method that is going to change that color. Okay, it's not going to change that color. It's going to change our state. So what I'm going to do now is going to say change. I'll just say change header color. I'm going to call this method change header color. And I'm going to set this equal to a function. Now this is a little funky here because we've never seen a method created on a component or a class like this. This is called, why is it escaping my brain right now? It's called class properties, and it is a new thing. So this is not instantly, yeah, like I said, sorry, Claire, just pay no attention to this. We'll get into it in a little bit later. But I just wanted to show it because it was really easy to display. So this is called class properties. It's a new thing in ES8, but it's one of the newer things. It's not quite full. I don't believe it's full production yet in the JavaScript language, but create React app, which we haven't used yet. And all of these are using something called Babel, which you know from converting our JSX is actually going to give us some extended functionality. So we can do this. So we want to do this way due to an issue with the this keyword that this solves. Anyways, this is when we create our own methods on our classes, this is the format we're going to do it in. The name of the method equals a function, okay? All right, so in this case, what I want to do is I want to change the color from salmon to Dodger blue, because obviously that's what I want it to be, right? So when I click on this, so before we get there, I'm going to add something to this H1. All right, this part, so never mind this part. We'll talk about this in a future lesson. But this part, what I'm going to do is going to create an event listener. So we create an event listener not just like we would, right? React has its own set of event listeners, okay? And they are modeled directly after our normal DOM event listeners. They're a little bit different. Let's look it up. A little bit different, but for the most part, oh my gosh, if I can type tonight, React event listeners. We can look into here, and where are we at? Come on. There was a list of them. Where's our list? Where the heck? There's a list of React events. No, I don't want that. I'll find it and share it with you. But it's essentially the same as our class, our regular DOM event listeners. Okay, so if I wanted something to happen when I clicked on this header, there we go. Thank you, Ryan. Which event would I use in the DOM? I'm going to do component or element dot add event listener. I'm going to use onClick, right? Tay, right? Is that okay? Had the right one right there, right? You're going to use the camel case version because it's React. So we're going to say onClick. So what's going to happen is React is going to add this event listener to our element, and it's going to say onClick, run whatever function we give it, whatever method we give it, right? And in this case, we're going to say this dot change color. So on click, this dot change color is going to be fired, right? We're going to use this because it's on the class itself, and we just give it the name. Why don't we do this? Oh, change header color. Sorry. Thank you. Why don't we give it our parentheses? It executes it immediately. It does not wait for the click, right? We learned this in DOM, in our applied JavaScript stuff. We just want to give it the function or the method itself, and then when the click happens, the onClick will call that method for us. What will the onClick, when it calls that method, what will it pass into that method? You remember? As an argument. Yeah, the event object, right? So this is the same. Now this is where React differs a little bit from the DOM. This event object React has tried to model it a lot like what's on the DOM, but it's a little bit different. You're going to have target still, and you're going to have some other stuff, but it's not a DOM event object. Okay, it is a React event object. So we're not going to be manipulating the DOM directly. We're using React to do that. You can. It's something called refs. It's advanced stuff, but we want to use React to change what we have. We don't want to manipulate the DOM directly ourselves. So it gives us this React event. And if we console log it, it's going to look very similar. To so why is this happening? Let's see. onClick, change header color. Weird. All right. Let's see. Synthetic event is reused for performance reasons. I am not changing anything. There we go. We'll just look at this. Console is cleared. So then we have what? Let's save this and see if that changes things. Console, clear that thing. Still getting those. Super weird. Change header color. I've never seen that issue before, Aaron, so I'm reluctant to use that because I don't know what that does, to be quite honest. So let's see. All right. Event.persist. Is this some sort of, I've never seen this before. Let's see it. The beauty of technology is that you learn console's cleared. Okay, I got it. But we're not getting the console log. See, that's really weird because we're not getting that console log now. Let's just say console log. What's up? Okay. For some reason, maybe it was just because I was calling the event. Yep. I don't know. It's because I was trying to console log the event. I'm going to look into that because I've never seen that before. Okay. Well, that's really weird. Event.persist. Strange. Okay, so we can console log it, see that it works just like a regular, good old-fashioned click handler, right? Okay. So now we want to change our color in our state to Dodger Blue. How do we do that? Can I say can I do this? Let me ask you this trick question. Can I do this? I will say I can do this. And if I console log this dot state, it will show that I have changed the color to Dodger Blue. But nothing will change on the screen. Just to prove it, boom, color, Dodger Blue. Nothing has changed on the screen. Why hasn't anything changed on the screen? Exactly. React has no idea that the state has changed. Okay? It doesn't know. This is a regular old JavaScript class. React has no clue that the state has changed. And so it has no clue that we need to re-render the component itself. React then, because of that, it says, hey, you got to let me know when we're changing things around here. And then if you let me know, then I know when to change it. So we use a method given to us by our React.component called setState. And setState is a method, okay? And what setState does is it allows us to pass in will it will not. You have to call force render, which you don't want to ever do, all right? So it allows us to pass in an object that will be merged with our current state. So it's not going to replace our current state. It's going to be merged with it, right? So if we wanted to change the color, we pass it an object, and we say color, and we give it the color we want to change it to, Dodger Blue. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, hey, React, I'm changing the state. It's going to change the state, and then React is going to call a re-render, all right? So if I click on this, do you think it'll change to Dodger Blue? I hope it does. Let's find out. There it goes. Okay, so now look at that. Now we have used React and we have used the state to manipulate what we see on the screen. All right, so now we're going to take this one step further. And I'm going to get rid of this on click. I'll leave it there if you want it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an input. I'm going to throw a poll up real quick. do a little agree, disagree, a little anonymous, send it in. Let me know, are you familiar with the input element and what it does? If you're not, we're going to learn all about it today. Not all about it, because there's a lot to learn about it, but okay, I'd see that most of us are on the neutral to agree spectrum. A few of us haven't seen the input element before. That's fine. We're going to talk about it here. So what input does is it allows us to create an input field. Look at this. Boom. We can just create an input field here. And I can type some stuff in here. And if there was a button, we could click and it would do something for us, right? So this is just a plain old regular input with type of text. So input can be type of button. It could be type of text field. There's a bunch of different types that input can be. For the most part, we do text, and so much that if you don't give it the type, it will automatically default to text. Okay, checkbox, radio, exactly. There's a ton of different things we can do. But if you're just going to use a text box, you don't even have to give it the type, because it's going to default to text, because that's what we use inputs for most often. All right. So inputs also have something we can call a name. We can name our input. This is especially helpful if we have something like a form, which we're going to build right now, that is, maybe 4 inputs. We can give them specific names so that we can call them later by that name. And we can also give it the value. So if I said a value and I gave this Dan right off the bat, look, it's going to automatically autofill that input box with Dan. Okay. Well, that didn't really help us much. So the value is what's going to be inside of the input box. Dan rules, right? Whatever. We can put whatever we want for the value. This is going to come in handy in just a moment. So the name, why don't we name this? I want to name this name because it's what we're going to use in just a moment, but let me see what I've named it on my other one. Type text, yep, name. All right. We're naming it name. Okay. Nombre. Oh, that'd be awesome. We should do that one, actually. So in here, on my state, I'm going to create a name in state. Okay. So we are going to create what is called a controlled input component. So what we're going to do is, instead of allowing us to type whatever we want, oh, notice if I type, why isn't anything appearing on the screen? Anyone got a guess? Yeah, because value is set to an empty string, and it's never going to change. If I didn't have that value, now I could type whatever I wanted, right? So that's why. It's because the value is set. So let's come in here now and say we have a state of a name, okay? So let's go value equals, we want it to be this.state.name. And you're going to be like, well, if you type anything in here, it won't change because name is an empty string. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a change handler for this. Input change handler equals event. Okay. And then how do we change what's on our state? We're going to use set state. Not quite yet, Jason, but we're going to get there in just a second. Yeah, we change our state by using set state, like this. No, it's this dot, right? So we say this dot set state, and what item, there's two different things set state can be, but for right now, what item does set state take as its argument? It's an object or a function, but for right now, we're going to do an object. Robert, I really want to get the document and the query selector and the get elements by ID and all of those DOM things. Let's forget about all of that stuff for right now, because we do not want to, once again, we do not want to manipulate the DOM directly. We are using React only as a way to manipulate the DOM. And does anyone know why we want to rely on React to manipulate the DOM? Just in a really quick overview way. And why we don't want to manipulate the DOM ourselves. I like that. I like Jason's. It's number one, you got it, Robert, so there's no confusion. And number two is React has a really, really good, fast way of doing it using the virtual DOM, right? So we're using the virtual DOM, and it's doing its comparison, and it's only changing the minute details it needs to in order to work. That's another major bonus of React. So we don't want to manipulate the DOM ourselves at all unless it's absolutely necessary. In most cases, it's not. All right, we're going to give it an object, and in this case, I'm going to hard code in what we're changing. I'm going to say name, and then where do I get what the value of this name? Where do I get that from on our event? So let me just back up for a second. What's going to happen here is we're going to see nothing because our initial state is nothing. And then when I click something in here, a keystroke is registered, and it is sent to our on-change handler. Okay, it will be once I do an on-change on that thing. That keystroke is going to be registered in our event, and just like Aaron said, event.target.value, right? So our event.target, what's our target? It's going to be the DOM element, which the React synthetic DOM element that we've triggered that event on. That's the target. And then .value. And this one's a weird one because everyone's like, well, the value is an empty string. But for a split second, it isn't. And we can grab that and change our state based on that. And then our state will change our input based on that. And now we have what's called a controlled component. So now our input is going to be based on our state at all times. Anyone know kind of what a pro, like what's the value of having our state control it at all times? What's good about having the input name in our state? Something to recover from, dynamic. I mean, inputs are dynamic as kind of a rule, right? They change. We store that state. We can then remember why we use state in React at all is because we can manipulate our UI based on the state. Jonathan's got another one. One source of truth is fantastic. We're not manipulating the DOM at all ourselves. Right? If I have state, and we're going to show you in just a minute, we can pass, we're doing it right now. We're passing state down as a prop, right? Look at this. So we're actually passing pieces of the state as a prop here. So I can use whatever's in this name and pass it to another component, and it'll be shown on that component, right? So we want to, with React, and this is a major point of React, we want to always have control of our data in React. We don't want to use any DOM manipulation. We don't want to use any uncontrolled inputs. We always want control of our data because that will give us the best, for lack of a better word at the moment, control over a whole application. Okay, so I will say that this input change handler thing right here, and it's going to get a little more confusing in just a minute, is a confusing part of this. But once you have this down, it's pretty easy to conceptualize. So what's the one last thing we're changing, or oh man, I gave it away. What's the one last thing we're missing from this in order to actually change our state? Yeah, all got it. We need an onChange event listener. And we're going to pass this input change handler into it. Okay. So right now, what's our initial state? Our name is an empty string, and we see an empty string appear inside of this input. All right, that's our value. OnChange. So when I click a key on here, it's going to fire that OnChange, even if it's not fully registered in the UI here quite yet. It's going to fire this OnChange because something has changed. The OnChange is going to call this method, which is then going to set our state to whatever the new value is. The state will be set to it, and our app will update that input and pass it the new value. So then was here. That's our new state. So if I log our state, let's check this out. Let's do right here. Open that. I'm going to console log our state as I type. It's changing our state as we go. Okay. So each time I hit a key, now let's look too. It changes our state. All right. Any questions on this? This is a very important concept in React. Yeah, you can. Someone was talking about creating the fun bus with ASCII art, so. And let me save this. All right. Any questions on this, or y'all got it? Or it's so confusing you don't have questions? Is there a difference in functionality with giving an input field an ID or a name? I don't think I can answer that as accurately as I want to right now. Names are for input fields and allow us to name an input field. IDs are for all elements and allow us to give a very specific CSS specificity to an element. For input, use name when you are trying to target the actual input itself. Does synthetic events cover all the same events as normal DOM events? No. So React only has a specific amount of synthetic events built in, and you can read about that in that. Someone posted it earlier. There we go. There's most of them, like I would say all of the normal events are there, but they're not all there. Right? There's probably some weird ones. Okay, Justin, great question. Why do I need to set the value on input? Because we are using our state to control this input field. If I didn't have, let's do that. That might not work, but let's see. Did not. Yeah, I guess it did. This is not reflecting our state. Okay. So if I said, anyways, it's hard to think of an example right now, but this is not reflecting our state. It kind of is, but let's take that away, and now it won't be. So we'll see that we can change what's in here, but it's not reflected on our state. This is called an uncontrolled input. We don't want that. We want it to be controlled. We want our state to control all of our views, all of our UI. So we are setting the value of the input based on what our state is, and we are changing the state based on what our event comes out to. If I wanted to store the value of an input into something more permanent, would I keep using the state object, or should I put it into something else? Well, it depends on what you mean by permanent. If you mean permanent to your browser, then use local storage. If you mean permanent to your application, use something like a database. We'll be going over all of that. But for right now, we're using state. And state is not persistent, right? It doesn't persist over multiple refreshes, right? We see that when we change one thing, our state gets set back to normal. So, Steve, yeah, we're going to talk about that in just 1 minute. So what we want to do now is we are going to build a form on here that will allow us to create a new character. It's going to add it to the list of current characters, and it's then going to add it to the list of our students here. Okay. Before we do that, I want to take another break. We'll get back and we'll finish this all up. All right, come on back and we will get this application rolling. So I want to answer James's question. When I typed in the input field and console log is always one character behind. So yeah, if you have a console log in here, right here, it's going to be one character behind because it's saying what the state is currently, right? So when you type one character in, the state is currently at nothing. Right, then we change the state here. One thing to talk about, and we'll talk about this much more in depth at a later time, is set state is what we call asynchronous, so it doesn't happen automatically, instantaneously. It could take a moment. So just know that as well. But let's come in here and let's build out this input. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap this input in what's called a form. Forms hark back to an earlier time in web development, but they give us some really cool functionality, mainly something called an onSubmit or onSubmit event handler. But we're going to wrap this in a form. I should be getting some really cool, some much better. Thought I was gonna be getting better CSS than this. Form. Let me just do a little copy paste of all my CSS. Give me 1 second. There we go. Much better CSS now. So yeah, forms. They definitely there's some functionality that forms use that's not necessarily pertinent to modern web development. So before you really set out to use forms, I would learn a little bit about them. We'll talk a little bit more right now. But what forms do is allow us to wrap semantically a bunch of inputs and buttons and stuff, right? So forms are semantic HTML that tell the browser and tell our SEO and tell other developers what we're doing here. We're creating a form. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create a form with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 input fields. We're going to create a new student on here. So I'm going to just do a little copy paste of a bunch of stuff on here. 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so now we have 5 input fields here. And I'm going to change some names on here. So give me 1 second. First one's called name. Second one's going to be called identity. And really, we can get these from name, identity, image, age, best friend. IMG, age, and best friend. Okay. Another thing that I want to talk about with inputs is something called a placeholder. So we can add a placeholder, which is going to be the text that appears within the input box before we type anything in. So if I say name, then we'll see name is in there, and as soon as I go in and start typing, it changes. Also notice that when I type something into this top box, that it changes for all of them. Does anyone know why? Think about it. Look at it. Not the method, the value, right? Look at the value is set to. So of course it's going to change that way. So yeah, look at that. I changed the state on one of them. And since they're all looking at the value of the state, it changes them on all of them. Okay. So we're going to add placeholders to all of these as well. I'll show you the occasional tediousness of web development. Okay, but it doesn't solve that problem, right? We have this cool placeholder in here now so that we know exactly what we're expecting from each of these. We don't have to have a special label for each of these. We can just give it the placeholder right in there. Okay, Aaron has a great suggestion. We need to create the values within the state object as well, right? We do. So we have name, identity, image, age, and best friend. So we need to create these values in our state. We're going to use a string for age. Cool. And then we'll need to come down in here and reflect those values on our state. Anyone have any questions as I'm doing this about why and what I'm doing? So each of these, we want to have their own separate data field. I mean, we want them to have their own place on the state, right? Because obviously name should not be displayed on age, right? So we want our value to be the name. So if I now type in, it'll only appear on Dan because the value is looking at name. It's not going to, nothing else is going to work right now. And then actually we'll change things for not the better, but because we had to change one more thing. So each of these has their own value now. And that value is represented on the state. Name, identity, right? We have the name, identity, image, age, best friend, right? They're all represented on the state. Now we need to do one more thing to this to get them to all work properly. Saved. It might change every time I save it. Oh, no, it didn't. Cool. Yeah, it works. Yeah, our input change handler right now is only setting the state on name. Okay. So could we put a change handler for each of these input fields? Could we do that? Yeah, absolutely. Right. We could totally do that. That would work. It's not dry, right? We don't want it to, we want to keep things as dry as possible. It's not dry, but what's a pro about that? What's good about setting on for each of these? Just looking on the bright side. Super readable, right, Rain? It's readable. We know exactly what they're doing. So, there's nothing wrong with, I don't want to say there's nothing wrong. You shouldn't do it that way, but if you did it that way, and you knew that a lot more developers are going to be looking at it that might not have this intimate React knowledge that you do, it makes things readable. You know exactly, like if you said identity input change handler, you know exactly what it does, right? So that's one pro in using it that way, but the cons outweigh the pros on that. It's just so much work. It's so all over the place. There's too much code in there. So what we want to do is we want to create this reusable input change handler. And we can do that using a little bit of what we call ESNext JavaScript magic, and what we can do in objects. So we cannot say, well, first of all, how do we get the name from our input in here? We can get the name each time this, or I would say the input name this field right here. How do we get it? Event.target.name. Yep. Just like we have event.target.value, we can do event.target.name. Event. But we can't do this because when we create a key value pair on an object, what we have for the key is very literal. Okay, it's very literal. It's gonna give us an error because it's like we don't want dots in there at all to begin with, but it's going to try to create a key called event.target.name, and we don't want that. We want to replace it with what that represents. And so within JavaScript, we can now create keys, dynamic keys in an object by wrapping it in square brackets. Okay, so we can say square bracket event.target.name, and when I type into identity, this is going to be replaced with identity. And when I type into age, this will get replaced with age. Okay, so it's a dynamic way of setting the key on our object. So it's a little tricky, but now we can use this same change handler for all 5 of these input fields. Okay, it's really cool stuff. I don't want you to get freaked out about it and like, why are there arrays with only one thing in it inside of an object? That it's just a little shorthand to do it. And we weren't able to do this before. This is a new thing. Before, we had to create a new input change handler for each of these fields, right? So it's really cool to be able to do that. Okay, so now if I go in here and say identity, me, identity is going to be me, age 35, that's me, best friend David, that's me, right? And now they're all going to work. Okay, and our state is changing accurately. I don't know if that's a joke or not, James, but I'm not hip on the PT4 inside jokes yet. How does my form look all nice? This CSS that I gave it. If you want to use it, you can use it. It's uploading, but cool. All right, so now that we have the ability to change all this stuff, we want to add this to our list of students, right? So what I'm going to add in here is a button. And button, just a regular old HTML button. And in here, I'm going to say add student. All right. Let's see, Lawrence, how can it change the other input fields if it's target.name? Because this target.name is what each of these is going to be. So when the identity input field calls the change handler, event is going to be the change. The target is going to be this element, and the name is going to be identity. So it's going to say identity is whatever our value is. And look what we have in our set state. We have an identity that corresponds with it. Okay. Does that make more sense? Cool. Awesome. All right, so you got to make sure that you have a state key that corresponds with the name in order for that to work. And this is all a bunch of trickery, little shortcut stuff to make inputs work. And it's funny. This isn't like you will see some React tutorials in the official docs on this kind of stuff, but this was just created by developers that wanted a shorthand way of doing all this stuff. So, yeah. All right. This would probably be better to say this. Student name would probably be a way better way to do this. Actually, I'm gonna do this because that makes it way less confusing. All right, instead of just name, it's gonna be student name. I'll save that so that those that are following along on here can see it. Okay, so this add student button currently does absolutely nothing. Well, it does something. And it's an awful side effect of what it does. So we need to add a couple of things. Anyone know what we need to add student? I could do input type button. Yep, but that's going to not give me that cool CSS. So we do need an event handler, and so the tricky thing about forms is that they allow us to do something called submit. So forms have this built-in functionality called submit. And right when I click on this, what it's actually doing is it's submitting it automatically for us. So I can do type of submit as well, which I should do on this button. And then I don't add the event handler to the button itself. If you didn't have this wrapped in a form, you would add the event handler to the button itself. But the form is going to have control over the whole thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to say on submit on our form itself, and we're going to give it a method. Okay, so it's a little tricky way of doing some button submit input handling form stuff. No need to use onClick on this one. If you didn't have this wrapped in a form, you would use onClick on the button. But since we have this on a form, the form is going to handle the whole thing for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to say form submit handler with the event, because it is an event listener. And the first thing, well, we're going to do this. We're going to pass this into our form so we don't get that weird thing anymore. And first things first, when I click add student here, what happens? Our screen refreshes. If I had, and I'm going to go 35, blah, 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 and I click the add student, our screen refreshes and our set state is reset. So what form has this, what we call a default functionality of sending the form. This is, without the use of JavaScript. It sends the data from the form to usually a PHP server. And it resets it to get it back to show that new data. But we don't want that to happen. Okay, so we have to use something called prevent default. Yep, a bunch of you got it. So we're going to say event dot prevent default. We don't want that default functionality happening. We want it to not do that. So now when I click add student, no way, doesn't reset it. Okay. So prevent default is going to stop the default functionality of the form from happening. And there's a lot of elements in HTML that has default functionality that we don't want it to happen anymore. And that's just legacy code. JavaScript has come up with faster and better ways to do things for us, but there's still a lot of legacy code out there that needs that default behavior. So now that we have this, now we want to take all of that data from our state, we want to put it into an object, and we want it to add it to our current list of students. Okay. So let's create that object first. Let's go let new student. We're going to create an object, right? We need a name. We need an identity. We need an age, an image, and a best friend. Okay, so what are we going to use for all of this data in here? We're going to create a new object that has these keys. Aaron says this.state.student name, this.state.identity, this.state.age, this.state.value, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what everyone thinks, or is there any other guesses of how we can do this? We could destructure. So if we did destructure, we'd have to make sure that we only grabbed the student name. Oops, I should say student name and not name. So that wouldn't work, and then I would be wondering why it didn't work. We'd have to make sure that we only grabbed these. And it could work, but we just need to, I think the best way of doing it is the way that Aaron mentioned, of just doing the this.state. We won't do event.target.studentName will, because we want to make sure that the state we're getting is from our actual state, that the data we're getting is from the state itself. So we are going to do it this way. Because we've been holding on to the state for a long time, we need to do something with it now, right? This is the reason that we hold on to the state. And like most of our examples, this one is fairly contrived, but you can imagine if we were doing this and sending this data to a database, right? For it to be saved on a database to do something. It's, getting saved to the actual state that it's coming from, but, it works. Cool. So now we have this new student object, right, that mimics all of the other students in here. Now what do we need to do? We need to add it to the array, right? So should I say students dot push new student? Why won't this work? Anyone have any guesses of why won't this work? There's a couple reasons. We can push the new student to that list of students. It's outside the class? No, I mean, that's fine. Scope, it's const. So the weird thing about const will, which don't make a lot of sense, is that you can push and pull and pop things off of it. Just we can't change it from to a different array. So the reason this isn't going to work is because, I mean, this will work. This will add this new student to that array up here, but React has no idea or care that this array changed. This isn't in React. This isn't in React scopes. It won't trigger a re-render. It's not going to change anything on our state at all, right? Students, we're using this as just a way to seed our state, okay? So we need to actually change the state of what we have in here. So what would we use if we're trying to change the state? Yes, we're going to use set state once again. Now, I'm going to show you how to do it two different ways. The first way is going to be the easy way that we're all going to want to do it. The second way is going to be the harder way, and I'll explain why we're doing it this way. So we're going to say students, and we're going to set it to a new array, and we're going to spread the old. We don't want to mess with these at all. Okay, we don't want to push anything onto our state. You don't want to manipulate the state itself. We want to always set our state to a new piece of data. Okay, in this case, we're going to set it to a new array. So the spread operator, let's go. Are you familiar with the spread operator when it comes to arrays? So what the spread operator is going to do is it's going to take that whole array and it's going to put all of those items into this new array. That's all it does. That's what the spread operator does. It takes that array and it spreads all of the items into a new array. And where it comes into handy is because then we can say all of those items and new student. So then it'll be all of those old items, and then we're also going to add new student to the end of it. What's the difference between this way and using push? Does anyone know? Yeah, this creates a brand new array, and we need to have a brand new array in our state. It's just something that React requires. We do not want to mutate any of the data in our state. Okay, so we always want to put a brand new array in there. This is difficult stuff. If this is like, whoa, this is crazy, I don't quite know what's going on, that's fine, right? We're doing this for the first time. Hopefully the second time you've seen it, but we're doing this for the first time. You're going to work on this. This is going to become second nature to you. If you're like freaking out, you're like, what is this, all these new spread operators, and I don't know what the set state thing is doing, just think back to when you didn't know JavaScript and now how much you know and how easy it is and how it just comes to you. It will come to you. It just takes a lot of practice, okay? We're not going to cover the strike through effect today. But what this is doing is this is creating a new array with all of our old students in it and one new student, okay? So if I come in here and I'm going to cheat and put a bunch of Harry Potter stuff that have been pre-written into here, Neville Longbottom is our new student. Neville is shy and clumsy, but good at herbology. There's an image for Neville, age 11, and best friend is. We'll add this student. Oh, didn't work. Why didn't it work? I thought it was going to work, but it's not going to yet. Could you push this new student to the students array and then reset state to that same array again? Yeah, you could. That's kind of a roundabout way of doing it, and you wouldn't want to do it. Honestly, most of the time, you are not going to have this. That students array is not going to exist for you. You're going to call a database somewhere. It's going to give you that array, and then that's just going to auto-populate it for you. No, it should have still worked. State students. Oh, because I said state students, not students. Let me just come in here, make sure this works. And we'll say state students on this as well. If that was what you said, then thank you. And where did I have name at in here? Thought I got rid of name as well. Yep. Okay. So let me just go put myself. Dan. Ooh, why did that work? Dan likes computers. Don't have an image. 35. David. So add student. And there's Dan. Okay, cool. Whoa. Maybe you were right. Name won't work. Uses name still. Component creation. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, well, we'll change. We got to change it back. Sorry. Because the student component takes name. All right, let's do this one more time. Dan likes computers. 35. David. There we go. Cool. All right. We have now are creating a new student. So I know we're at right at 9:30 right now. I do want to talk about this because it is very important. So we're going to do another 5 minutes on this. This works, and this is going to work for you 99% of the time. 98% of the time, I'll say. But like I had mentioned before, set state is what we call an asynchronous function. It doesn't happen automatically. Okay, we are going to. It's going to happen it's going to work 98% of the time, and then 2% of the time it's not going to work, and you're going to pull your hair out and not understand why it's not working. So why it wouldn't work is if maybe you were setting the state on something else before, and you then tried to set it, and then it deleted some other students, and it added a student, and it would be all funky. So the set state takes two different types of arguments. You can either give it a object or you can give it a function. And in the case of the function, we're going to do this. We're going to give it a function, and that function is going to take previous state as its one argument. The previous state. So whatever the state was when it was called. Okay, and instead of calling set state or this dot state right off the bat, we're going to call previous state. Now, like I said, yeah, we should set all those, right? Okay, we can do that too. But I want to make sure that we understand what's going on here. So we're going to return an object using previous state. So this allows us to use the state that was current whenever this was called. And this is going to remove any kind of uncertainty from our, is it going to work? Is it going to have the right state? All of that in there. So this is the way, if you're going to use state to update state, this is the way you have to do it. All right. If you're not using any state in here, any previous state in your update, then you don't have to do this. You can just use, like right here, we're not using any previous state in here. We're using a target name and a target value, and we're setting our state like that. But since we're using previous state, we need to use it in this way. And now I can come in here too and say name. And this is just aesthetic. Oh yeah, I'll save it. I know there's a lot going on here. And now let's come in here and see if it works. Once again, Neville Longbottom. Shy and clumsy, but good at herbology. I really want that image. Add student. And there's Neville for us. So I have saved this. I will share this with you all. we've gone through a lot of stuff tonight, right? We've gone through creating class components. We've gone through event handlers and event listeners in React. We've gone through inputs and forms, setting the state, lots and lots and lots of stuff. This is a really heavy lecture. And so I know. So take this, all of this I've written. I am actually going to, I would really like to refactor this out, but I'm going to do that later and show it to you all. I'll refactor it out on Wednesday and make this form its own component. But go through, start working on your project tonight. Use this as a guide, use the training kit as a guide, and really try to wrap your head around why we're doing things we do. I hope I've been able to explain a lot of this stuff tonight. But it's going to take jumping in there and actually playing around with it yourself to really understand. Also, it's going to take a lot of frustration because there's going to be many times when you change state incorrectly and you don't know why it's not updating, and you're going to be like, oh, let me just use the force update. Don't ever use force render or force update because there's no need to do it. As long as you're setting your state properly, there's really no reason to do it. Because in student, Randy, it's using it as an image in here. So it's using the address as an image. And that was part of your older one. Yeah, no worries. We've gone over a lot. It's like brain fried, right? Yep, this will be as soon as it's uploaded. Cool. All right, everyone. That's it for tonight, thankfully. I've shared that link with you. React is super fun. This is a really amazing stuff. You're going to build really awesome stuff with it. It's a lot of fun when you finally get it, but it's a lot of work to get it. And it is great, and it works really well. And I love working with React. So go work on your projects. Have fun with it. Try not to get too frustrated, and I'll see you all on Wednesday. Have a good night, everyone.